The House Committee on Oversight will come to order. Would the clerk please take attendance?
Chair DeBoyer.
Here.
Representatives Bierlein.
Here.
Mearman.
Here.
Paquette.
Here.
Cara.
Here.
Bruck.
Present.
Green. Regas.
Here.
Shriver. Wolford. Miller. Pahutsky. Conlon. McDonald. Menser. Cerniglu. Wagella. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Representative Menser moves to approve the minutes of the September 30th meeting. Hear no objections. They are approved. Today's meeting we will be having testimony and comment on the recent updated health education standard framework that has been proposed by the State Board of Education. After all testimony and questions have been exhausted, we will hold a vote on House Resolution 195. First up to testify today will be Dr. Sue Carnell, interim state superintendent, to testify to the proposed health education standards. Dr. Carnell, begin whenever you are ready.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I just want to introduce a couple of people that are with me today. We have Dr. Pamela Pugh, who is the State Board of Education President, and I also want to introduce Dr. Diane Golzinski. She's the Deputy Superintendent in charge of school health and among other things. Also with me today are other department staff. So thank you again for this opportunity. My name is Sue Carnell. I'm the interim state superintendent. You requested my attendance today to address your concerns about the proposed 2025 Comprehensive Health Education Standards under development for consideration by the State Board of Education. I'd like to start today with 3 areas that I believe we have common ground. First one. The first common area or first common ground area that I think that we have in common is that we must follow the law. There are 3 laws that I will reference for this committee that the department follows related to health standards. First one, MCL Section 380-1278 delegates to the department the responsibility of developing standards for both health education and sex education. This section also requires health education as a part of graduation requirements. Second law, 380-1169, which requires instruction of dangerous communicable diseases, included but not limited to HIV/AIDS, and best methods for restricting and prevention. This instruction stresses the abstinence from sex and as a responsible and effective manner for prevention. And the third law is Section 1507, requires decisions about sex education be made at the local level. Local school boards decide what to teach, and parents can opt their children out of any and all sex education lessons. That's been the case in the past, and nothing is changing with the proposed new standards. The second area of common ground is parents' rights. We believe in the natural, fundamental right of parents and legal guardians to determine the direct care, teaching, and education of their children. We believe parents have the right to a voice in the process and outcomes for their own children. And the third common ground I want to mention is academics. We believe that as a state, we need to focus on academics. English and language arts and other core areas are extremely important. So how do we address what we believe are common ground issues? Well, let's take a deeper look at the 3 laws. Developing standards. This process of bringing new or updated education standards to the Board of Education for consideration is as follows. And this is as they relate to health education. The National Health Education Standards were drafted, reviewed, and passed in March of 2024 by the Society for Health and Physical Education. The national standards provide a comprehensive framework for educators to deliver high-quality instruction and make a positive difference in the health and well-being of every student. There was a national health education standard task force comprised of a diverse group of stakeholders from grades K through 12, higher education, and national health education organizations. MDE then reviewed the national standards and compared them to our 2007 standards. We reviewed the standards from other states and developed the Michigan version of the updated health education standards. First round of interviews included a small group of content experts, those that are in nutrition and mental health and safety, to review any missing skills or determine accuracy of terminology. The MDE team made edits and sent the first draft out for a second review. The second round was sent to statewide organizations and individuals who are health educators, teachers, and administrators. The final draft was then presented to MDE leadership team for review and revision. We presented the draft health education standards to the board at a public meeting on September 9th. The draft standards were posted on our website, then opened up for public comment for a period of 30 days. We also put out social media posts and a press release encouraging public comment. On October 14th, we sent additional press releases and social media posts sharing that parent opt-out remained unchanged. We are currently editing the draft standards based on public comments within the parameters of the law. Based on what we are reading and hearing, we know that revisions are necessary to add clarity to the opt-out provision. At a future board meeting, we will bring new draft standards to the board for consideration. Let's talk about sex education requirements. According to 380-1169, Dangerous and Communicable Diseases, HIV and AIDS, Awareness on Prevention, Teaching of Abstinence from Sex must be taught in every public school in the state. This requirement is for sex education and usually is embedded in health education at the local level. It must be taught by a trained professional and it must be medically accurate. We agree that the goal of health education is to develop an individual who is health literate and engages in practices that lead to an overall healthy lifestyle throughout their life. Before adopting any revisions to a curriculum implemented under this section, included but not limited to the revisions to provide for the teaching of abstinence from sex as a responsible method for restriction and prevention of a disease, a school board shall hold at least 2 public hearings on the proposed revisions. The hearings shall be held at least 1 week apart, and public notice of the hearings shall be given in a manner required in Section 1201 for board meetings. A public hearing held pursuant to this section may be held in conjunction with a public hearing pursuant to Section 1507. Now let's look at 1507. The board of a school district may engage qualified instructors to provide facilities and equipment for instruction in sex education, including family planning, human sexuality, and emotional, physical, psychological, hygienic, economic, and social aspects of the family. Instructions may also include the subject of reproductive health, and the recognition of prevention, the treatment of sexually transmitted disease. The class shall be an elective. It is not a requirement for graduation. A school district shall not offer this instruction unless Sex Education Advisory Board is established by the board of the school district. Since October 1999, the choice of a curriculum to teach topics must be approved by the local school board. The board must hold at least again, 2 public hearings, and they must be 1 week apart. Sex education standards were also embedded in the health and education standards in our 2007 version. Let's talk about parents' rights. Parents' rights under Section 380, 1170 still exist for the required HIV/AIDS instruction, and parents' rights still exist under Section 380, 1506 regarding opt-out, which states upon written notice, request of the pupil's parent or guardian, the pupil shall be excused without penalty or loss of academic credit. Let's talk about academics. While the focus is on ELA and math, that is very important, but it doesn't mean that other subjects or content should not be taught. There is a connection. The research is clear that for all students, feeling seen, heard, and valued at a school is the foundation for successful academic engagement and achievement. According to PubMed Central out of the National Library of Medicine, which did a longitudinal study on feeling of safety at school, found that students who feel unsafe in school show statistically significant reduction in education attainment. We believe it is our duty to protect all students from harassment in school. This includes teaching the basics of tolerance, respect, acceptance as early as possible. Section 380-1507B, subsection 2H, the law states that we must teach that the pupil has the power to control personal behaviors. Pupils shall be taught to base their actions on reasoning, self-discipline, a sense of responsibility, self-control, and ethical considerations such as respect for self and others. It is our legal and ethical obligation to protect students from harassment. Laws passed by this legislature require schools to maintain a safe and inclusive learning environment free from discrimination and harassment. In 2023, this very legislature amended the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, Public Act 6 of 2023, to include provisions that ensure equal opportunity for quality education and promote inclusiveness, which includes sexual orientation and gender identity. This act added sexual orientation and gender identity or expression as a protected category. We cannot possibly meet the standards of our own civil rights without health standards that meet the needs of all students. So let's talk about all students. The research is also clear that when such things as gender identity are presented in a way that is medically accurate and developmentally appropriate, children experience lower rates of bullying, harassment, and suicide. If we want children to excel in the basics of reading, writing, and math, we must provide an atmosphere where all students feel safe. Gender-diverse students are often report feeling unsafe at school and experience greater rates of harassment. They indicate that they rarely report discriminatory incidents because when they do report them, they feel unprotected. Gender-diverse students experience greater gender-related stress at school and are more likely to be absent, have a lower GPA, and report higher levels of depression, engage in more substance use and risky behaviors, and are at an elevated risk for suicide. Michigan's gender-diverse students are 1.8 times more likely to have been threatened or injured with a weapon at school, 2.1 times more likely to skip school because they feel unsafe, 1.6 times more likely to have been bullied at school or online. It is important to note that gender-diverse students are not inherently prone to mental or physical health risks because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. They are at a higher rate due to experiences of discrimination, stigmatizations, victimizations in society. So the question has been asked, why Massachusetts? If we take a moment to look at Massachusetts, it ranks #1 nationally in reading and math based on national assessments of educational progress for 2024. It rates of high school students reporting being bullied on school property or electronically are lower than ours. The rates of students feeling sad or hopeless or attempting suicide are also lower than ours. And Massachusetts health education standards are based on national health education standards, just like the ones we drafted and posted on our website. Let's talk about the process of standards versus curriculum and the local boards of education approval process. Just to be clear, these are educational standards. They're not a curriculum. A curriculum is a program created by local districts that outline the content and method of instruction, including activities, lessons, and assessment. Standards are educational goals and benchmarks that define what students should know and be able to do at each grade span. Standards are typically developed at the state level. Michigan is a local control state when it comes to education, so the state does not determine curriculum for health education. The standards typically do not provide all the details, particular skills, or fundamental information that may be part of the curriculum. School districts have discretion to determine how standards will be implemented at the local level within the parameters of Michigan law, with the input from parents specific to sex education. Educator qualifications for teaching health education. A teacher with an elementary certificate in grades K through 5 is qualified to teach health education for grades designated all subject on a certificate. Although the law allows elementary teachers to teach health education without a specific endorsement, it is highly recommended by the Michigan Department of Education that teachers receive professional development from an approved program in health and sex education that includes training in the curriculum, implementation, best practices, and current state law related to health education. The regional school health coordinators can assist with this training. A teacher with a certificate in a secondary setting, grades 6 through 12, is authorized to teach health education with any one of the following endorsements: MA in health, MC, which is K through 12 health and physical education, MX, which is health and physical education, recreation and dance, or a KH, family and consumer science. Let's talk about local education and parent choice in sex education and HIV/AIDS instruction. LEAs determine what content within sexual health instruction they will include in their health education program. LEAs are encouraged to use student and community data, parent input, and community values to determine which content will best support the health and well-being of students in their district. Michigan is one of the top states that require parent input on sex health instruction. Sex education advisory boards must consist of at least 50% parent membership to review student data, review curricula, and make recommendations to the local school board of education for review and approval. Parents have the right to review sex education curriculum prior to instruction and can opt out their child from any or some of the sex education and HIV/AIDS instruction. I'm going to talk a little bit more about parent input and choice. As we presented to the State Board in September, local control and parent choice remain unchanged. with these proposed standards, no matter where sex education is mentioned within the standards. The standards change, but the local control and parents' ability to review curriculum and opt their child out does not change. The word parent or family can be found almost 60 times in our Michigan Health Education Standards Framework. As stated in 1507, if a district chooses to offer sex education, there are safeguards in place that prioritize parents' input and choice. Districts must have a local sex education advisory board that consists of parents who must make up, again, at least half of the membership and at least one parent as the appointed co-chair, clergy, community health professionals, students, and educators. Again, Sex Education Advisory Board use local data and community values to review the various sexual health curricula available and offer recommendations to the local Board of Education that meets the needs of students and the community values. Districts choose which health standards, which normally include HIV and AIDS, are taught in their school in accordance with MCL 380-1169, which indicates, again, that the school board has to hold the 2 public hearings. Not every standard is required to be taught. Districts get to choose. Apart from HIV and AIDS and communicable disease lessons that are required by state law in Section 1169. We have also been clear about parent input and choice as outlined in 1137, which remains unchanged. This section recognized the rights of parents to review local curriculum, textbooks, and teaching of materials of schools. Parents are to be notified of sex ed instruction prior to lessons being taught. Parents have the right to review sex education curricula prior to instruction. Under Section 1507, Part A, parent can excuse a child without penalty from some or all sex education instruction at any grade, included but not limited to HIV/AIDS required instruction under Section 1169. Under the proposed standards, parent would be able to opt out of sex education lessons within the health class. Parents can still opt out of sex education lessons within health education classes, no matter where sex education standards are located within the document, which is specified on page 5 of the health standards. Having sex education standards within the standards is not new. Historically, sex education standards have been an important part of Michigan's comprehensive health standards. The current standards adopted in 2007 included both general health education and sex education standards within the same document. Our records indicate that this was the case in the past. Sex education has always been considered to be part of a comprehensive health for both Michigan and nationally. Parents' notification regarding opt-out opportunity has been in place for quite a while. Parents can and will continue to be able to opt out of instruction based on any new sex education standards that become part of a larger health education program. Having sex education lessons within health education does not remove a parent's ability to opt out. In Section 1507, it requires that if sex education is taught in a school district, that the school district shall offer instruction by the teacher qualified to teach health education. This is why historically sex education has been included in health education course. Again, this is not new. We believe that a set of comprehensive health education standards provide local districts with the best information possible to make their own decisions about what and how to teach this information. In conclusion, based on public comments, we have been following our established process by looking at the original draft of the health education standards, and determining where we have a legal authority to make change. Our intent with the second draft will be to make it even clearer which of the standards fall under each of the laws specific to local districts' responsibility and parent choice, while still maintaining the national gold standard of dividing the standards out by grade spans and topic areas. I may not convince you that all of the proposed standards are needed for your own children, but it's important that we don't take them away for the entirety of the almost 1.4 million public school children, as some districts whose community feel that these topics are important and want them to be taught in school. Limiting or removing topics at the state level undermines local controls and denies districts the flexibility to provide instruction that reflects their population data and community values. Even in those communities that choose to cover what may be considered controversial, individual parents still have the right to determine what's best for their own children and may continue to opt out their child without academic penalty as provided to them by law. We want every parent to have a say in their child's education. Thank you for the opportunity.
I appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts on this. We do have plenty of questions, so if you don't mind, we're going to get right into those.
Sounds great.
I would like to say that Representative Merriman really quickly appreciate his leadership on this role, and I think that it's only fitting that I go to Representative Merriman on his first questions.
Thank you, Chair DeBoer. Thank you, Doctor, for taking the time to come in here. In your testimony, you talked about MCL 380-1169, 1278, giving authority to make standard for sex ed. I guess I don't see that there. I think that's a stretch to find standards, allowing the department to make standards for sex ed.
1278 allows the department to make standards, and later on in the section, it does talk about the sex ed related to HIV, AIDS, and communicable diseases. That standards need to be developed at the state level.
If the department's goal is clarity and parents' rights, you talked, I think, 3 different times about our current state sex education law, where you could have the local school board in combination with local sex ed boards as kind of the arbitrators and the decision makers of what sex education should be in that school. And you, like I said, you went over, I think, 3 times. If the idea is to have clarity and, clear purpose, why mix the two? I know you said they overlap, and I agree with you somewhat, but it seems like it's making it more unclear the way you're going.
We are, based on the comments that we are reviewing, and we're still in the process of looking at it, we may look at how to present it differently.
Yeah, I would encourage that.
Thank you.
I appreciate you looking at that. I think the sex education standards are well written, and I think the parents' ability to feed into that at the local level is a good thing, which you mentioned again 3 times. And to me, this just makes another whole process, which I'm a little unclear about how schools would notify parents when this is coming up in their health education class, case by case by case by case. It's coming up this week, but not next week. Opt your kid out this week. Why not just keep it all in the sex education class?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Would you repeat it?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
If it's in the health curriculum, which every student has to take, and you're saying there's going to be an opt-out if they veer off into the sex education part of things, I would assume that could happen at different points in time during that semester. And so then the parents are going to be notified next week we'll talk about it, but not the week after. And then 3 weeks from now we'll talk about it. So you need to opt out for this week, and then you need to opt out for the 5th week.
Usually that's not how it work at the local level, but I do want to clarify one piece. Health education in the standards that we have presented are not required. A health education course is required for graduation. It does not mean that you have to use the health standards in our guidance in your health education course.
That was not my understanding. That I think the schools need to cover what you put in the Michigan Merit Curriculum, and what you're doing is changing health standards for Michigan Merit Curriculum.
No, we are, so this is a guidance, it's a framework. Health education is required. What's taught in health education is up to the local district, aside from HIV, AIDS, and communicable diseases.
Just one more question, and then you can come back to me if you want, Chair, later. So there are things in the health code that the legislature has asked to be taught: vision, narcotics, accident prevention, dental hygiene, alcohol, drugs, tobacco, nutrition, mental health.
Yeah, I think the key word there is ask.
I don't quite understand. You said ask?
So our standards provide that information. If a school district, based on input from the parent or administrators, want to teach those things, they can. There's no penalty if they don't. The course is required. There are certain standards that can be met, but it's not required that they teach all of them. The only requirement is communicable diseases.
I think I might disagree with you there somewhat, but I guess in the proposed health new standards, and I understand your version 2 you're coming out with, but we're missing, vision, narcotics, accident prevention, tobacco. I guess I would suggest if we're wanting to protect children's health, those things would be in the new proposed standards. And I'm not sure why they got left out.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Merriman. I think Representative Merriman was being kind when he said suggest. The statute requires those things to be taught in your health classes. It's not a suggestion. And there virtually is nothing in your standards about that, but there's a litany of information in your standards. You mentioned reproductive health 7 times. You mentioned sexual orientation twice. You mentioned gender 4 times. And you mentioned advocacy 8 times, as well as sexual health 21 times. What's the fixation on the sexual activity that is so predominant coming at us on this? Because, we have a individual who made a statement. And there were comments made earlier, but let me just read this statement to you really quick. Politicians, media, and advocacy groups have spread falsehoods to scare parents into thinking that schools would teach sex education to their children without giving parents a chance to opt out for the instruction. Nothing could be further from the truth. But you also said that this is a public comment period, right, where people have that opportunity to come forward and talk through what these things say. I find it disturbing that the president and now candidate for state senate would make that statement, the president of the school board, because this is actually what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to have those conversations. We're supposed to talk about what this says, and we're supposed to debate what role you have in educating our children. And the reality is that there's lots of things in this proposed guidelines that do not line up with the beliefs of parents. They do not believe it is the role of the government, which, by the way, you are, to dictate these kinds of things. Things like you said, the science of gender. How many genders are there? How many genders are there?
Different people have different beliefs on that.
Well, you can believe all you want, but science says there's 2. So why is it that we believe we have to put this indoctrination into our you can believe whatever you want, and that's perfectly okay. And any parent can believe whatever they want, and that's perfectly okay. And any politician can believe whatever they want, and that's perfectly okay. But why are we putting it in the curriculum to educate our children about that? What's the reason behind that?
The reason behind it is that we find that children who are gender diverse are being harassed, bullied in school. We can't make education gains if students feel unsafe.
Wouldn't disagree with you on that. Completely agree that we have to keep our children safe. But are you saying that by you providing this education on gender fluidity or multiple gender theory, are you saying that what that will do is it will stop those kinds of behaviors in school?
The standards point to understanding tolerance, inclusivity, and based on what we know from Massachusetts, it has made a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to go back to the point where you made about dictate. We are not dictating these standards. They're a guideline. And when you talk about the fixation on what I presented, it is based on the comments that I received. So other people are pointing to this being an issue. This is why I addressed it with the committee.
Can I just ask you really quick, how's Michigan doing in math and reading?
We are not at the top of what Massachusetts is providing. We need to work on our reading and math, but we know that students in classrooms need to feel safe in order to excel.
Safe from what again?
Bullying, harassment.
What other issues that they get bullied on are you addressing in this health guideline?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Okay. When's the last time we updated the curriculum for reading and math and science in the state of Michigan?
I think it's been within the last 5 years. I've been with the department 5.5 years. It hasn't, I think it was recently updated when I first started.
And the results of that, again, are what? That we're 47th in the nation in education?
Well, no, on that piece, I want to talk about that through this legislature, we've just got new laws into place that help with the science of reading so that we can make a difference in our reading achievement. Those laws just started. We've just started with the implementation of high-quality instructional material in reading so that schools can use those high-quality instructional materials based on the science of reading. It takes a little time to get there. So we're just beginning our reading efforts.
Last point I'll make, and we'll move on. There's lots of people who want to ask questions. At least in 4 locations in your guidance, it talks about these provisions not just applying in health. It applies across the curriculum in every class, that these standards that you're offering, suggesting in your words, can be shared in any other class that may feel the need to share them. So when that happens, how is it that parents have the option to opt out?
Because as I mentioned, anything related to sex education standards, parents have the right to opt out. It is not unusual for content to be taught through different curriculums or curricula areas. Some students may learn math in an ELA class. Some students may learn social studies in an ELA class or vice versa. But anything related to sex education, a parent has the right to opt out, be notified and opt out.
Why is it, do you believe, that the legislature enacted a law, passed a law that separated sex education from all of the other education standards?
I would have to ask the legislature.
I I believe that they did that because I think it's our job as the experts to understand that and at least have an opinion. I believe they did that because that is a very personal, cultural, family, religious belief, varying things like that issue, very different than the science of mathematics. That is the reason that they separated it out. And when we start to commingle it, and when we start to put information in the health education that is highly debatable for multiple reasons, but we act as if it is an affirmed, proven thing, there is where parents start to become concerned. And when the sitting superintendent claims that that's baloney and that it's not accurate and it's fear-mongering, you couldn't be more disrespectful to make a statement like that. So
I did make that statement.
I'm sorry, I said superintendent, I do apologize. The school board president.
So I just want to go back a little bit to our standards that we currently have in 2007, the current ones. They embedded sex ed as well.
And here we are. So we're going to move on. Representative Jamie Green.
Well, and I'm going to add an extra layer. Thank you, Dr. Carnell, who is the acting superintendent in the hot seat right now. We've done some great work on that literacy program, and so I appreciate your knowledge in that. And the biggest thing, just for clarity for people watching at home, I know my mom watches this. This document is a draft of the Health Education Standards Framework. So the biggest concern is that it invites sensitive social and sexual content into every subject, not just health. And that's what we're concerned about, is because, yes, you are correct. You're absolutely following the law when it comes to sex ed. And we would love to update that because, like Representative Meerman said, there's a lot of things that need to go in there that's not in there and that we need to. But what is the red flags? Like on page 7 of this document, it says, a clear articulation of social emotional competencies integrated into all areas of content. On page 8, the whole school, whole community, whole child approach across all disciplines. Page 9, it urges curriculum designers. So I know we're talking about standards. There's a difference between standards and curriculum, but it encourages curriculum designers for the transferability of the practice of those sex ed topics, skills across all topics and all disciplines. And then, of course, on page 13 and 14, it allows educators, not necessarily that trained person, to mix and match the practices, concepts, and performance expectations as needed for their context. So that's why this document is bringing because in plain terms, this proposal makes it possible to embed sexual health and identity material, sexual like identity, which we already have a disagreement on this, of how many genders there are right here at this table. So it integrates it throughout all the curriculums without any boundaries or parental notification. So that's the big crux of this. And so I guess I have 2 questions. And you may have kind of answered this with earlier, but so what guardrails do you plan on putting in, since this is a draft, to prevent sexual health or gender identity material from being inserted into non-health classes such as English, social studies, and science? So that's something we're asking, and you don't necessarily have to answer that because I know you're taking feedback. So if you want to answer it, because I have another question as well.
We believe that the Sex Ed Advisory Board, which is at the local level, would be the best place to monitor that.
So that would be a big ask for our local school boards, because right now they don't get intimately involved in the curriculum. They don't read textbooks, they don't read the science books, English books, or anything. So they're not able to, because I thank all my school boards for their tough job, but they usually have full-time jobs and they do this job voluntarily. So how would that?
Yes, thank you, Rep. Green, for the question. So anything that's related to sex ed has to be part of the Sex Ed Advisory Board. So whether it's in English language, or no matter where it is in the school day or part of the curriculum, just not because it's in health ed standards comprehensively, but anywhere else in the school day, if it involves teaching of sex ed, it should be part of the sex ed advisory board that makes the recommendation that says this is okay to teach to the local board, who says then it's okay to teach.
So I guess just for clarification, so then when an English class talks about gender identity, that will trigger that MCL 3801507, and then kids would opt out of English class because we're talking about that. They would opt out of social studies. They would opt out if it's brought into the math curriculum. So kids then are pretty much going to get a piecemealed education in some districts, the districts that allow this to go into, and you're also putting that burden on the school boards to then have to, because this would trigger that code, that MCL code, to trigger the board to come in and discuss this topic.
Right, but it doesn't mean that school districts will teach gender identity or teach all of the standards within this framework if the local district decide based on their data that these are standards that they want to teach. They go through the process. But it shouldn't be interpreted that it's haphazard, that it is a coordinated approach, that has been decided by the Sex Ed Advisory Board to the local board, that these standards will be taught, where they'll be taught, and parents should know before they're taught. That's what the law says.
Right, and so we still don't then have, I'm still not fully getting my answer on how the school boards then are supposed to go through all the textbooks when it starts bringing in all of the sex ed topics.
It doesn't mean that a school district or a teacher, let's take a teacher in a class, goes from page 1 to 36 or 1 to 336 and say, this is the curriculum I'm going to teach. They may pull from different standards and say, I'm going to teach this standard and this standards, but they will know from their local board which standards that they can teach if it's relative to sex education.
So if a teacher then, it's in a book and they teach gender identity in social studies, then what is the accountability for the teacher that does that?
Just like with anything that's inappropriate, someone would say that this teacher taught them that. A student may go back to the parent, then it goes back to the principal and the school board that this is inappropriate, and that's how it's monitored.
Do you see, though, how this makes those lines blurred a little bit?
I don't, because anything related to sex education, a parent has to be informed.
Can I ask one other question? Who helped you create this document besides the Massachusetts model?
We used the Massachusetts model. The standards came from a national group. The national group is called the National Health Standards, was done by SHAPE is the acronym, Society for Health and Physical Education.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Paquette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I very much appreciate you being here. I'm on page 32 with regard to sexual health, 6th through 8th graders. And point 2 says, explain how biological sex, gender identity, gender expression are distinct concepts and how they interact with each other. And I very much appreciate your specific comment concerning medical accuracy and gender identity. So it's important to point to the medical history of that term, and it used to be gender identity disorder, and it has been medicalized categorically as a mental disorder. Now this document in front of me, it proposes the teaching to not only embrace this disorder to 6th graders, but also to encourage young people in a very confusing time, such as puberty, to embrace it and inevitably tend to tread down a medicalized path. But right now, with regard to my question to you, it's my biggest concern that gender identity has been conflated with sex. Sex cannot be changed, yet gender identity contends that a young male can say he is a female. and it relies on these identifying terms that are very sex-specific. So gender identity is taking the place of sex, and I don't see how these two concepts can coexist. So how do we reconcile these two terms, sex and gender identity, when gender identity insinuates that a male can be a female in all walks of life?
There is also research that shows that that's one viewpoint of looking at it. There are other viewpoints of looking at what you stated, and I can get you that information at another time.
So can sex be changed?
There are people who have their identity, their sexual identity changed.
So I will be here and tell you that sex cannot be changed, and that is 100% truth. And we need to teach that to young people because that's what love does. You tell people the truth, and you don't mislead them down a path that is untrue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
It's clear that you have taken a position that that other viewpoint is what you believe. So therefore that is in our documentation before us.
I wish I had that much power overall, but I don't.
Excuse me. The document confirms the viewpoint that you just said. There are other views. The document confirms that, correct?
You pointed to me.
Does the document confirm that there are other views based on what your position was? You argued back. You said there are other views. This document aligns with those other views.
That part is correct.
Correct. So therefore, yourself, your board, by presenting this, have taken a position of acceptance of the other view. Is that correct?
No.
No.
No. Just, there are a lot of views. This document is for those who have that view. If those who have a different view want to take something else from this document, they can.
I see. Minority Vice Chair Miller. I'm sorry. Thank you. Representative Cara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Cornell, for being here today. You mentioned earlier that the department is required to follow state law, namely regarding gender identity and expression, like you just discussed with Representative Paquette here. My question is, if a male with XY chromosomes mutilates a body part and pretends to be a female, does that make him a female?
I'm not sure why I personally get these questions. We're here to talk about the standards related to this document.
Right, and we're looking out for the well-being of our kids.
All
and we're
children.
trying not to confuse them. So if a child is identifying as something they are not, does that make them that something that they are not?
Makes them who they are.
If a male pretends to be a female, does that make him a female?
It makes him who he is or who she is. It's how he or she identifies.
But because they identify or express in a certain way does not make them a female. And it's important not to confuse our kids. Can we agree that 2 + 2 = 4?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, good. I'm glad we can agree with that immutable truth. There's other immutable truths. We should not be confusing our kids, and I hope that the department takes this seriously moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Pahutsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do just have to make one point. Everyone keeps talking about science this and science that, as though y'all don't have a scientist in the room. Science does not dictate that there are two genders, for the record, and it didn't actually take my degree. I learned that from my high school science curriculum. Actually, since we're talking about curriculum, what I did not learn in my Catholic school was anything about sexual orientation or gender identity. It turns out not hearing about it in my health class, though, didn't make me any less queer, and it didn't make me any less queer in any of the other classes I went to where queer kids were bullied. So Thank you very much for being here, Doctor. My question is, we've heard a lot about folks who are not happy about the framework, but I know during public comment, everyone was available to comment. Did you hear supportive comments, and if so, what were they?
Absolutely. We heard a lot of support from parents of transgender children or relatives, people in their family, to say, stay with the standards, stick the course, we support the standards.
Thank you very much.
Representative Bierlein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to using the Massachusetts model because of their high educational outputs and ranking in the nation. So I'm going to be fully transparent. I use ChatGPT to just pull up some quick, why are they doing so well? It does talk about consistent funding, so I'm sure we could have that argument at this table about what consistent funding means. But this is a 30-year process that has gone through numerous iterations of the most rigorous curriculum in the nation to produce the highest outcomes in math, science, and language arts. It doesn't talk about, there's nothing in here that talks about sex ed, there's nothing that talks about their mental health. So have we adopted all of those other aspects from their curriculum as well? Are we looking at what they're doing in math, science, and reading to make sure that if we want to engage at that level of output in our education system, that we're looking at the other things that the best practice person is doing?
The answer to that is yes, but we're also looking at other states who are showing a high increase in their achievement in reading. My point about Massachusetts is because we use their standards, many believe that because we need to work on our math and science, our math and ELA, what did we have in common with Massachusetts? It is great to have a good curriculum. It is great to have a long-standing practice of support, financial support, or laws that help uplift reading or math or science. But students have to be in the classroom in order to learn. And my point is that because Massachusetts has the same type of standards, that they're more successful in getting kids in the classroom to learn their high-quality instruction. So we learn from Massachusetts on funding. We may learn from Mississippi on their reading initiative on science of reading. We may learn something from California on math. So we try to take a little bit from other states that are doing well to create our best practices on how to increase student achievement.
So as you're looking throughout the nation, has the state Board of Ed looked at things like cell phone use and those kinds of policies in other states?
Absolutely. And the some are saying that when cell phones are not in the classroom, we hear from superintendents, when they're not in the classroom, students are doing better. There's not a one-size-fits-all that we should just say, well, no more cell phones, and then all of a sudden student achievement will increase. It is about looking at the curriculum, it's looking at the funding, it's looking at students feeling accepted and wanting to be in school and not being harassed, not being bullied, feeling safe. It is a combination of efforts that help increase student achievement in all content areas.
You asked the rest of my questions, Mr. Chair, so I'll refrain from.
Okay, so I'm going to just be very pointed here to everyone. We do have a number of questions left, individuals who would like to ask questions. I will indulge those questions, but I'm going to say right now, go immediately to your question. No precursors, no diatribe, no speech. Go immediately to your question. If we can't do that, I am going to move on to the next people to testify because we will run out of time if we do not do that. Is that an agreement here? Everybody understands that? Representative Wagala.
It's Wagella Chair, but that's okay.
I'm working on it, I'm sorry.
Thank you for being here. So my question is, so in the recommendations, it talks about defining gender identity and gender expression, sexual orientation. In Michigan state law, we have the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act, which, prevents discrimination in educational institutions, et cetera. So I'm getting to the question.
Please.
So these terms are referenced in protected classes in Elliott Larson's Civil Rights Act. So isn't understanding your own civil rights and those of others in the state that you live in important to mental health and physical health safety?
Yes.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Shriver, one question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One question. Just one. Here we go. You mentioned abstinence and teaching abstinence and supporting abstinence. I really appreciate that existence. Can you condemn efforts to remove abstinence, teaching abstinence? Can you condemn that?
The law requires the teaching of abstinence. We would
Yes,
not go against the
but my question is, can you condemn efforts to change that law?
The law requires, we're going to stick with the law. The law.
I understand. So House Bill 6068 of 2024, nearly 50% of House Democrats co-sponsored this. This would have teachers handing out condoms, teaching students how to abort. Can you condemn this type of effort? I appreciate you standing for abstinence. There are active efforts to change this. Can you condemn these efforts to change the existing law, which is good?
The department is going to follow the law.
Thank you.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Trying to figure out a question myself. Simple question after all the pontificating.
I apologize, but you know how the time works.
So I guess I'll go back to the accusation that this is dictating to the school districts. You had a great opening remarks, but you talked at length about how this works. Could you just say very briefly the points at which districts and parents can opt out of the curriculum that is not written by the MDE, that is not written by the school boards? Could you just kind of show that, how that works in a timeline?
I think if I understand the question correctly, we look at and develop the standards. We provide it to the State Board of Education to say, here are the standards. We'd like to go out for public comment. We go out for public comment. We put it on social media. We put out a press release letting everyone know the time is available for public comment.
Actually, I mean a little differently.
Okay.
At what point after these are adopted, how can parents and school districts opt out? Do they have to follow this to the letter 100%? Because everybody here
No.
knows that their school district would not follow this document 100%.
No, absolutely. No,
Nobody.
they do not have to follow it 100%.
There is no dictating.
No, there is no
Thank you.
dictating of these standards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Regas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Carnell, for being here today. So you'd mentioned several times about the Massachusetts standards and how that was, did you say that was successful? That was kind of the model here?
I said that the Massachusetts standards were used because they were closer aligned to the national standards, and they were also closer aligned to our original standards of 2007, the current ones.
Okay, and Mr. Chair, just indulge me just for a second, I'm sorry. So I have pulled up here some information, sex on the school calendar, and this is Massachusetts, Bisexual Awareness Day, Coming Out Day, Asexual Awareness Week, Intersex Awareness Day, Trans Awareness Month, Transgender Awareness Week, Pansexual Pride Day, International Transgender Day of Visibility, Lesbian Day of Visibility, International Day Against Homophobia, which I would actually agree with that one, but Aromantic Awareness Week. I just had to look that up because I'm not educated on what a romantic means. But do you think that this would reflect like what the people in Michigan would want as a whole? Or do you think that the parents of Michigan are actually more concerned in bringing back the commitment to reading, writing, and arithmetic with actual sex education, teaching about anatomy and abstinence and these communicable diseases? Or are we going to continue to sidetrack on these areas and almost obsess about this stuff, because it almost feels like there's been an obsession to interject sexuality and perversion into not only this curriculum and standards, but into, you want to make sure that all subjects have the ability to teach that. My question is, do you feel that that's actually appropriate?
All subjects can teach it if they have the trained personnel.
I will disagree with you right now, because in ELA in my community, you say that everything has to be approved. That is false. You know that it's false. In each teacher's individual library, they have the discretion to keep what books they wish to have in their rooms. Those books are actually not vetted by the school board, and I know this personally because my 14-year-old son last year was reading a very, very graphic sexual novel. It had nothing to do with sexual education. It had to do with abortion, gang violence. Everything that we tried to shield our children from in the real world was given to my child. When I went to the school board meeting to read one passage from that book, when I went back to listen to that school board meeting on YouTube, they muted what I was reading, and there was an excerpt on the bottom that said, violates school community standards. You think that's appropriate?
There is one correction. I said that parents had the right to opt out of anything related to sex ed.
I did opt out.
Okay, but I said something different. So.
No, these books that are in these classrooms are not.
You do have to move
vetted.
on, please.
That's a
Sorry,
fact.
I
Thank you.
apologize.
Thank you.
Representative Wolford.
Thank you, Chair. I find it ironic that when I put forth a bill to keep men out of women's sports, everyone said that it wasn't a big enough population or an issue for it to be something voted on, yet we've spent this entire time talking on those issues on that same small amount of people. Having said that, our schools, ma'am, would you agree were built on reading, writing, arithmetic, American history, and the story of liberty, and that's what originally made us great? Would you agree on that? I know you couldn't agree that 2 + 2 = 4, but I think that we could possibly agree on that. Would you agree?
I did agree that 2 + 2 = 4. I agree that schools were built for a variety of reasons on different principles.
Okay, so having said that, the chair talked about that our scores have plummeted 20 points in the last 10 years, and our proficiency in reading is at 50%. So knowing that those are all the issues, why would you continue to push this agenda on LGBTQ, transgender, all of those things within your education, knowing that the things that made us great, the things that from the schoolhouse to the factories that helped us win World War II and create some of the most incredible minds, splitting the atom, et cetera, yet we're focused on this. So my questions to you is, one, would you agree, since you said that people are suffering in these areas, to teach again that there is one God who created man and woman, that you would create, or that you would teach that he formed that baby in its mother's womb, and maybe that might help with some of these issues? That's the one question. Second question, are you planning to adopt these standards, even though the public is obviously against these and it's not constitutional? So those are my two questions for you. Thank you.
I'll go with the second one first. The comments that we received on the standards had to do with parent opt-out. There needs to be clarity around that, which we will work on based on the comments that we received. Parents can opt out of any portion of instruction related to sex education.
Okay, the problem with opting out, and this is my last thing, Chair, is even when you opt out, even in a very conservative district like ours, in the library, there's books that show and teach kids how to masturbate, how to have anal sex. I don't see how this opt-out. As a matter of fact, I think we should just eliminate the sex ed department altogether. Thank you, Chair.
Representative Miller.
Thank you. If the health ed standards are removed, how are teachers exactly supposed to address the students sitting in their classrooms that are LGBTQ? Without denying their existence. And wouldn't you say, would you agree that teaching reality isn't about taking sides? It's about the real world in which they have to live in. It's about respect. It's about facts, and it's about transparencies. Is it not?
Yes.
Representative Bruck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Department of Education sets the standards for what is required for graduation, correct? Like you have to take reading, correct, to graduate, so many credits of reading, so many credits of science, so many blah, blah, blah.
The legislature set the requirements for graduation. We provide the standards to use for those requirements in content areas.
But health is required for graduation, a health class, government class. Sex education is not.
Except for HIV.
Except for
communicable diseases.
So my question is gender identity considered sex education?
Yes.
So the melding of, and this has been brought up multiple times, so that being taught in another class, say social studies or something, that would be considered sex education.
If it was taught in another class, it has to be taught by somebody who's trained.
Okay, but if they're not trained, then there's a
Then you can't
process
teach
to
it
get.
if it's not part of something that's been approved by the board or the Sex Ed Advisory Committee. It cannot be taught. It should not be taught.
Are there science teachers teaching flat earth theory, do you think? I mean, the Department of Education would be against that because that's probably not acceptable. But there's people that actually believe that may be teaching that. I think the melding, and that's been brought up multiple times, is how as a parent, and I believe sex education should be sex education, not health, where a parent can opt out completely, not have this cross pollination, if you will. I think that's been brought up multiple times, and that's what I'm stressing again. Ma'am. Thank you, Doctor, for being here.
Thank you,
Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Doctor, thank you for taking the time to be here, answer the questions, give your position. We always appreciate the open dialogue, so thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much.
We are going to move to a video. We did invite the Michigan Board of Education here today as well. The only individual who chose to provide a statement is School Board Member Nikki Snyder. There was a video provided to us, and we are going to play that video at this time. We'll give you a minute here to see if you can get it. If not, we'll move on.
Michigan lawfully requires for graduation. I reject the sex education standards that the Michigan Department of Education is presenting under the guise of the health education Michigan lawfully requires for graduation. As a member of the State Board of Education and a school nurse, I am experienced with the everyday reality of the needs of students in schools here in Michigan. Sex education is sex education. Health education is health education. Our legislature has a history of honoring the separation of these two courses for a number of good reasons. First, Michigan's legal structure has long declared that parents have the primary authority in their children's lives, especially as it relates to controversial concepts of identity formation. Our Constitution and laws provide for this not to protect one group of students, but to protect all individual students being raised by the many different families we have across the state of Michigan that identify with values that differ from one another. Instead of allowing parents to shape values at home, the proposed health standards wrongly leverage state authority to teach gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, sexuality, and the process of seeking approved sources of information that defines any one of these concepts. What children in schools need to be taught is that we live in a state and country that is diverse, with many families that come from different sets of values, and that we are to respect and honor the freedom that every individual has to hold a set of values that are different from one another. The government and schools, as an extension of the services provided by the government, have no business shaping students' values and beliefs about controversial concepts like identity formation by adopting specific definitions of those values, claiming what sources of information that define those values are valid or not valid, and setting sex education standards that break current law of requiring parental opt-out by confusing those standards with health education credits. Second, health education is in fact important. The topics that are outlined in our health education standards law and required for graduation under the Michigan Merit Curriculum include drugs, narcotics, alcohol, tobacco, mental health, dental health, vision care, nutrition, disease prevention and control, accident prevention, and related health and safety topics. Again, as a school nurse, I can tell you that we are suffering from a number of things that need attention. Students who feel as though they need to go home because they are experiencing a minor symptom without any signs of serious illness are a significant contributing cause of chronic absenteeism. Many students struggle to understand how their bodies work, including the importance of healthy blood sugar and making choices to eat sufficient protein. This impacts the way the brain works and how information can be learned and retained. With the legalization of cannabis, the danger of understanding what a gummy is and what gummy bears are is a real issue, as well as how often alcoholism can be traced back to the first drink in high school. Understanding the importance of speaking up and going to an authority with information was a real issue in the Oxford shooting. Reports of students staying home anticipating safety issues that dark day when school administration did not address real threats in real time, which led to lives lost and a mental health crisis within a community that now still suffers long term. This continues to be one of the most unfortunate opportunities to understand what can actually be done about school safety. What is not necessary is replacing the importance of allowing these true health education topics to be taught and confusing them with topics like gender identity. While students with gender dysphoria have mental health needs, it should never be acceptable for a Department of Education to politically hijack those needs and use them to divide the people of Michigan in their effort to retain power and control in an established education system so many Michiganders are seeking to change for the better. Finally, we understand that overly sexualized health education standards demonstrate a much bigger education governance problem in Michigan that needs to be addressed. We have a bureaucratic body, the Department of Education, disregarding a U.S. Supreme Court opinion and interpreting Michigan laws as if they are a judge and legislators, administratively writing policy that reshapes laws and removes protected rights in a manner wholly inconsistent with legislative intent and the plain meaning of the original law. There is no real accountability to their actions whatsoever. The governor has no power or authority over the DOE or its employees that are led by a superintendent mostly selected by a majority of one political party since 1963. That majority has refused to do anything about the most controversial issues that parents have brought before the State Board of Education for decades. The DOE is currently moving these standards unilaterally under an interim superintendent that has refused to give an email address or appropriate contact information for Dr. Maleko, the next state superintendent that was selected through a very corrupt process. These standards are being pushed before he starts as a clear effort to shield him from what he should have to own. These sex education standards should be stopped. Our laws governing health education standards should be taken seriously. And our Department of Education, State Superintendent, and State Board of Education need serious review for effectiveness. Our educational governance has led our state to be at the bottom, and we are not on a path that will lead us to the top 10 anytime soon. We have much work to do. Thank you.
We are going to run a little bit long, so I will go at ease for a minute. Anybody that needs to take a 5-minute break here. Members, if you can make your way back up front, please. Members? Members, please make your way back up front. Members, please. The Oversight Committee will come back to order. Thank you for your patience, everybody who's in attendance. We will now hear from Representative Gina Johnson, Representative Jamie Thompson, Senator Lana Tice, as well as David Coleman with the Coleman Legal Group, and Catherine Boussard with Salt and Life Global. If you would come up. Representative Johnson, appreciate you being here. Everyone else, thank you for being here as well. Begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I want to make note that the State Board of Ed has exited the room. They are not here for this part of the testimony, looks like. I'm also going to yield the beginning of this testimonial time to Senator Tice as she needs to get to session.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, members of the committee. I very much appreciate you taking the time to do a deep dive into this so-called framework. I'm going to take a slightly different approach. For the record, my degree is in biology and chemistry, and there are two types of gametes, male and female. I'm asking the Michigan Board of Education to outright reject this proposed framework. It's an activist document, not neutral education curriculum, and its effects won't be neutral either. For example, regarding SEL, the social emotional learning, the most common personality test used by psychologists to identify neuroticism is called the NEO-PIR. It lists self-consciousness as a subset of neuroticism. There's no identifiable difference between being anxious, depressed, or self-conscious. And all SEL does is tell these students to keep checking in with their feelings. We're causing them anxiety. We're causing them depression. We're not strengthening them in any way. And this document, this draft, makes it even worse, especially for our pubescent girls. I have never met a woman who thought going through puberty was a good time. I've never met a woman who thought she was perfectly comfortable with her body while going through puberty. That's what you tell the kids. It's uncomfortable, you got it, it is. And you got this, you'll get through it. And the other end's gonna be amazing. An SEL training is like group therapy combined with a struggle section and is of itself causative of trauma. Kids are releasing information in their classrooms as a part of SEL that they have no business telling their neighbor kids they wouldn't otherwise tell, but they feel pressured to. Little Johnny admits his dad was arrested for drunk driving the night before, and now he gets to deal with all the ramifications of that. The counselors that you've put in the schools to help these kids are best friends with the teachers. The parent-child relationship is getting intervened upon, and the doctor-patient privilege, the privacy of the doctor-patient relationship is absolutely gone. And these kids are encouraged to be all the feels, to tell all their feelings, to release all the information, and in itself is causing trauma, causing anxiety for our kids. So what should we do? What would actually help them? We focus them outwardly. We tell them to figure out how to help others, to treat others the way they would like to be treated. We don't need to tribalize these kids. You treat everybody with respect. You treat everybody with kindness. You figure out how to help them. You don't ask them to identify their tribes and make it worse. I just read a book about someone who was held hostage with 3 other people for well over a year. The thing he said that helped their mental health was at night, before they laid down, they identified things to be thankful about. While they were in the tunnels, their legs chained. They were identifying things to be thankful about, and that's what stabilized their mental health. This emphasis on trauma-informed language creates iatrogenic harm. The people who are supposedly trying to fix the thing are causing the problem. Not all kids need to receive information as if they've undergone trauma. Not all of them have experienced it. And it doesn't help them to get information, to get that, here's how you commit suicide, children. No, this is not what we should be teaching them in any way, shape, or form. You should be treating the actual victims. You should be helping the kids that actually need help. But this is not something that you can scale school-wide, and it shouldn't be done. When you add this to the rest of the so-called health ed climate alarmism, deforestation is a part of health ed? Are you kidding me? Of course the kids are afraid. You told them they needed to be. Their world was going to end. This environmental health should not be a part of health ed. Activism should not be a part of health ed. Advocacy is mentioned 8 times in this document, but the statutory requirement of vision health, 3 times. Dental health, once. When you're encouraging the kids to be activists, even against their parents because of a moral worldview, you are harming the children. That's not a help. They need their families strengthened, not torn apart. No health class should be teaching activism as part of the class. Teach them health. Then we get back to teaching them reading, writing, and math. We teach them to treat others the way they want to be treated. To keep the kids from feeling unsafe, we stop lecturing them about how unsafe they are. But it's very clear, this document, and I'm going to touch a little bit for a few minutes with your grace. I'm going to touch a little bit on what you guys were talking about with the sex ed portion of it. The sex ed portion is supposed to be optional. Parents are supposed to have knowledge of it in advance. It's not supposed to be spread, and thank you guys for bringing that all out. It's not supposed to be spread through all the other classes. Again, treat everybody with respect. Treat them the way you want to be treated. But with respect to these guidelines, they don't live in a vacuum. Curriculum creators will write curriculum to match the guidelines. That's how they sell what it is they need to sell. schools need to abide by the curriculum guidelines in order for their accreditation to remain. While they're not required to adopt these standards, there's a lot of pressure associated with it. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but Planned Parenthood is the primary provider of sexual health curriculum throughout the entire country. From 2020 to 2023, they took 80% of all sex ed grant money in the United States. Planned Parenthood is also, through its different organizations, the primary provider of gender treatment in the country, the primary provider of abortion in the country. So we're going to have Little Debbie and their donuts be the one teaching us about what it means to have food health? We're going to have an organization that has a financial incentive in causing children to become gender confused or to get pregnant, be the one teaching abstinence and health? This is sheer insanity. We shouldn't, sex ed should remain sex ed, and while we're at it, we ought to make sure Planned Parenthood gets out of the business of it. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have much more to say, but I am grateful. Grateful to all of you for digging down into this. Grateful for all of you caring about our children enough. I don't think I introduced myself. Lana Tice, State Senator, 22nd District, also prior chair of the Education Committee for the Michigan State Senate. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for cutting into your session time here to be here today.
Thank you also for the opportunity to testify this morning on this issue that goes to the heart of parental rights, local control, and the moral, credible foundation of education in our state. The resolution before you calls on the Michigan Department of Ed and the State Board of Ed to reject the proposed health education standards framework in its entirety and to produce a new version that reflects the law, respects parental rights, restores transparency and local decision-making, or leave the current framework and content as is. Our resolution reaffirms the clear intent of Section 1507 of the revised school code, which requires that sex ed be locally controlled, transparent, and optional. Parents must be notified in advance, have the opportunity to participate in local advisory boards, retain the right to excuse their children from instruction that conflicts with their family's values. There are many people in this room behind me that have already expressed they don't get to do that in their school districts. We would be better, our time would be better spent fixing that problem, enforcing the way it is before making it worse. These safeguards are not symbolic. They are essential protections that ensure families, not government, guide the moral and educational upbringing of their children. The proposed health education standards framework disregard these boundaries, even though Dr. Parnell said they don't. It embeds lessons on gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation into required health instruction, effectively making them mandatory topics. This removes parental choice, undermines local authority, crosses a line that the legislature has already defined in law, which was passed in 2007 with a bipartisan legislature and signed by Governor Jennifer Granholm. It's not modernization the way they want to make the changes now. It is overreach, indoctrination, politically biased, and clearly sexualizes our children and causes confusion, depression, and anxiety. At a time, and this was already mentioned by Chair DeBoyer, Michigan students are falling behind in reading, writing, math, science, etc. Our priority should be improving academic performance, not advancing ideology that is perverse and highly controversial. We should not be introducing highly controversial information and calling it education when the largest body of people, the taxpayers, the parents, the grandparents, have already spoken and made it clear they do not want this. Schools should strengthen minds, not replace the values taught at home. Parents and grandparents have expressed, families have expressed, that their faith, their freedoms are the foundation of Michigan's communities. When government agencies move beyond their authority, it is our responsibility as legislators to intervene and restore the accountability. This resolution does exactly that. It makes clear that classrooms belong to families and local communities, not to bureaucrats or political agendas. By the way, the age of legal sexual activity, sexual consent is 16. I don't understand us teaching below age 16 and encouraging sexual activity. Are we encouraging illegal activity? You can't legally get married until you're 18 in this state. Are we encouraging a failure for our children? I urge this committee to support the resolution and stand with Michigan parents in defending their right to direct the moral and educational upbringing of their children. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, for your attention, allowing me to speak. I'm going to turn this over to Representative Jamie Thompson at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Representative Jamie Thompson from the 28th House District, and a mom of 3, a grandmother of 4, who is raising 3 of those grandchildren since they were 3, 5, and 7, since we lost their mother in a motorcycle accident and their father took off on them. My husband and I have been the sole guardians of those 3 babies, who are now 7, 9, and 11. And I will tell you that the world is hard enough to raise children, let alone grandparents raising children, which we know in the state of Michigan there are high numbers of grandparents raising grandchildren in kinship families, that we have enough on our plate to make sure that we're protecting these kids and raising them without their mom and dad in their life and helping them face everything that's going to be pushed on them so that they are not made to be victims, so that they are made to excel and thrive and have wonderful lives and keep them innocent. We don't need our schools making it harder for us to do our job. The job that we did not automatically give birth to those children, but that we chose to be their mom and to be their dad. I want to talk a little bit about something that somebody that was presenting here, the doctor. She said that they worked with the Society for Health Education, otherwise known as SIECUS. You can write this down, SIECUS. You can go to their website, siecus.org, and you will see very clearly what they advocate for in curriculums. They believe that abstinence is failing our kids. Teaching abstinence is ineffective. They believe that teaching abstinence to children threatens the fundamental human right of sex. They believe that we should be encouraging our children safe and healthy ways to engage in sex. And in Michigan, we know that the age of consent is 16. So why would SIECUS be working with our Board of Education to teach this to 3rd graders, 8 and 9-year-olds? Yet, the Michigan State Board of Education believes that these proposed standards, that they will include abstinence, but it's barely mentioned, twice in middle school, once in high school, and each time it's presented simply as just one option in the many options on how they can engage in sex. This is hazardous to our children. This is hazardous to Michigan. Michigan law requires that this material, when discussing sex, be age appropriate. They talked a lot about children who believed to be transgender or queer being bullied. I've been serving in office for 3 years. Every phone call that comes to my office or is emailed to my office never has been from a parent whose child was being bullied for being gay or being transgender. It was for being pretty, for being smart, for being fat, for being skinny, for having blue hair, for having short hair, for having long hair. The bullying that is going on in our schools, it's a lot of economic bullying. They're making fun of children because we have kids coming in from different districts who are from different cultures, different backgrounds, different economics. Those are the kids that are getting bullied. I know of 2 cheerleaders 2 cheerleaders in a school downriver that both attempted suicide because their cheer team was being mean to them. Not because they were gay, not because they were queer, not because they believed that they were a different sex, because they were being mean girls. And the school did not take it serious and did not listen to parents. I can also tell you that on a local level in the city of Taylor, they were attempting to present a rogue sex education program to parents who had to find out the hard way that their board was not even acting legally. We talk about Michigan compiled law. We talk about having a state sex ed advisory board that is comprised of the majority, over 50% parents, a clergyman, a healthcare provider, or health department person. These local districts have rogue sex ed boards that are operating and approving sex education for students that do not have parental consent and do not have the majority of parents serving on that board. So I want to give a huge shout out to Moms for Liberty in Wayne County who were able to get into that board, get that board shut down because they were not acting lawfully. So now they don't even have a sex ed advisory board. So if the good doctor that spoke earlier says that we are going to keep sex ed boards and we're going to make sure that we're keeping this parental consent in place, how in the heck do they think they're going to do that if what they've proposed is so confusing and vague now that they can't even do it when they're legally supposed to? And one last thing that I will add, there has been a lot of talk about social emotional learning and just how wonderful it is for our kids. And I do agree with my colleague, Senator. Thank you for bringing that up, because I oppose the formal adoption of social emotional learning incorporated into this framework of health in our schools, our K through 12. It's promoted in schools, but it does not have sufficient transparency, it does not have parental input, and it does not have clarity about outcomes. There has been actually a lot of resources and a lot of research in this. A review by the National Education Policy Center noted that many SEL programs are not adequately defined and that they push to make SEL central to schooling, raising issues about what exactly the role of the school is versus the role of the family, meaning we do not co-parent with the government. Critics argue that SEL programs require large investments in training and resources, and when improperly implemented, they do not deliver the promised outcomes, raising the question of whether they divert time and resources from actual academics. And one last thing, the concern also includes parental rights, the rights of a parent who gave birth to a child when that child grew inside of them. Not the Michigan Board of Education, not the teacher, not anyone serving on this committee. That mother and father birthed that child. The concern also includes parental rights. Parents have raised objections that SEL curriculum may encroach on their value system, their own characters, and their belief and their discussions, areas where families believe that they should be refraining from that at school. In closing, I believe that this is a huge circumvention of the law. I urge this committee to make sure that we are planting our feet firmly on the ground and that we're going to continue these conversations. And I encourage the legislature to be looking to ways to make sure that we are addressing parental rights properly within the legislation. And I urge everyone here today to vote yes on the resolution to oppose these changed health standards. Thank you.
Just if I may really quick, I do realize that this is an emotional issue supported by many people here, but decorum in the committee room is to refrain from outburst of either support or opposition. So appreciate that, guys. Thank you. We can continue.
Thank you, Chair DeBoer. Are you able to hear me here?
There's a Y, DeBoer. There's a DeBoer, too.
DeBoyer, sorry. All right. Can you hear me now? All right, Chair DeBoyer, thank you. Committee members. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. My name is David Kallman. I'm Senior Legal Partner with Kallman Legal Group here in Lansing. I'm also Senior Litigation Attorney with Great Lakes Justice Center. I've litigated constitutional and civil rights issues for over 40 years in federal and state courts and all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm very familiar with a lot of these constitutional issues. I was very involved in educational cases here in the state. In fact, you might know the People versus DeYoung case, which freed up home education in Michigan. I was a trial attorney in that case. MCL 380.10, which is part of HR 195, I helped draft that language back in the day. So I guess this all just means I'm old. I've been around for a while. But I appreciate the chance to be here, and I think it's always important to listen to all sides and find common ground, as Interim Superintendent Carnell said. I agree with her emphasis on the rights of parents, stressing the importance of academics, the need to follow the law. I think those are areas of common ground. However, I do have concerns with these health standards as currently drafted, and I'm going to confine my comments to two basic areas and try to be as brief as I can. First is just general legal questions, conflicts within the law versus the standards, and then liability issues. So the first one, there's many legal questions that come up here with these legal standards. First, there is no clear opt-out provision in the standards regarding health and the health standards. There's constant reference to sex education and opting out. There's no such comparable language in the health standards or the health code. The reproductive health section is also important. Everybody talks about section 1507. Look at 1506. It talks about reproductive health and also allowing for opting out. So opting out of sex education does not apply to health standards. And if it did, then which standards does it apply to? I heard for the first time here today that the department's position is gender identity is now part of sex. That's the first time I've heard that in these discussions. And frankly, I agree with her. You might remember the Rauschworld case that we were involved with. The Michigan Supreme Court ruled that the word sex, for the purposes of Elliott Larson, includes sexual orientation. And so issues like this, sexual orientation, gender identity, are now included in the word sex. So if that's true, why are these in the health standards? They should be in the sex education standards. It's that simple. And then it begs the question, folks, what falls under the definition of sex education? That's what's not clear here, and that's what's not clearly set forth in these standards. So that is a real problem. Secondly, do these standards jeopardize federal funds? And some of these I'm just going to gloss over. I just want to bring these to your attention. We are aware of the executive order, and there's other moves in Congress right now to deal with these issues. And so is this going to, give a problem to the state in receiving federal funds into local boards? And remember, MCL 388.384 requires the proper use of federal funds. So that's overlaying all of this. Third, there's a conflict here between the local school board control that we've heard about this morning and these state standards. The districts must teach health standards. It's required under the statute. We all know that. Districts may elect not to teach sex ed. They can refuse to do it totally. That's not an option for the health ed and health standards. And how do these sex advisory boards apply? I've been hearing all of this, as referenced under section 1507. I think it's pretty clear it only applies to sex education. It doesn't apply. These boards do not have any control over health education. So that is a real conflict then within these standards in the law. What about students being required to take a health class to graduate, but not sex education? And when you blur then, well, part of it's sex ed and part of it's not, you see the conflicts that are arising there. Next, number 4, these standards are vague and overbroad. And I'm using legal terms I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but us lawyers use it all the time. If a statute or a standard or an administrative rule is vague or overbroad, it's unconstitutional, cannot be applied. And I think these standards clearly fall into that. Required topics are hardly mentioned, and this has been brought up. Vision, tobacco, other things that were already brought up. They're hardly mentioned in these standards. Terms are not defined. What is a trusted adult? What does that mean? What is advocacy? what is the word sex, as I said earlier. These are all vague and overbroad standards that are going to be legal problems that us attorneys are going to be using if they're passed the way they are. I can tell you right now, we get a plaintiff or something is being challenged, these are the issues we're going to be raising. And frankly, that will prevail on the way it's set up right now. Fifth, these health standards violate parents' constitutional rights and their statutory rights. There's a whole line of cases going back to the Pierce, Meyer, and these are Supreme Court of the U.S. cases. Pierce, Meyer, Yoder, the most recent Mahmoud case. All these lines of cases affirming the rights of parents, and especially opting out in Mahmoud. MCL 380.10, as we've already talked about. And this is important language, folks. You need to understand, when that statute in Michigan was passed and it said it's the natural fundamental right of parents to raise and educate their kids, that elevated these issues then to what's called under the law strict scrutiny, which is the highest level of scrutiny a court gives to any constitutional issue, and usually means the parents win. And that's codified in our statute. That's why that Section 10 is so important. Section 1507, the right of parents to be notified, be able to review curriculum, be able to opt out. But again, that says of sex ed. That doesn't apply to health. It's not there. Section 1278 that we talked about, I look at that statute and its title is core academic curriculum. I mean, it's talking about core curriculum. And then Section 1278B, small b, talks about attitudes, beliefs, value systems, et cetera. I know you're familiar with that language. But again, that's important because it's violating parental rights. We could sit here and say we disagree, and that's fine. And I hope we can all disagree agreeably. But if I have a grandchild now in the public schools or a child, and they're being taught these sorts of things, gender identity and all of that is natural and is fine and you have to accept it. I mean, honestly, folks, if somebody has anorexia, do we encourage that? Do we affirm that because they have anorexia and think they're overweight? And then tell them to keep going? What about body dysmorphic disorder? That's a thing. These people truly believe, they feel that a part of their body isn't right. Like their arm should be cut off or their legs should be cut off because that's the disorder they have. But they truly believe it. So should we affirm that and help them in amputating a perfectly healthy leg? Come on, this is silliness. These sorts of things, and this doesn't mean you treat people poorly. This doesn't mean you don't give people help. This doesn't mean that you don't, meet kids where they are and get them the help they need. Of course, all of those things. But it also doesn't mean that the state should take a position then to tell everybody else who disagrees with it based on religious or moral or other grounds to say, you got to do it and you got to agree with us, or your kid can't graduate from high school because they won't be able to take the health course. I think you can see the problem that's going to come up there. Now, the last thing here on the first part about these concerns and just general is how are local school boards supposed to navigate all of this, the conflicts between state law and the health standards. What about the opt-out issue? Is a local school board just supposed to say, well, we think they opt out now, you can opt out of health class? Well, I can see a lawsuit saying, no, you can't do that. It's a required course under state law. You see the conflict, and again, the risk of federal funds. Let me just briefly go to the second, liability exposure, because this is huge, and I'm telling you, I've litigated these cases, and frankly, a plaintiff comes to us, I'll be bringing a case like this. For example, and the most important one is First Amendment civil rights violations. I think it's crystal clear here. In 3 ways. Students don't lose their civil rights. They don't lose their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse door, the Tinker case. You're all familiar with that. So what if a child refuses to go to a class where something is being taught in the social studies or the history and they're talking about gender identity and the student says, gets up, no, I'm leaving. I don't have to listen to this. Are they going to be disciplined? Are they going to lose grades? Are they going to be kicked out of the class? Are they going to face truancy charges? You see the problems. Parents, as we've already discussed above, the various statutes and their constitutional rights, I think it's very clear. And all of this is 1983 actions in federal court. We wouldn't be going to state court, we'd be going to federal court on these things. But finally, and one I haven't heard anything about really this morning, teachers. Okay, teachers don't lose their constitutional rights in these areas either. These standards would require teachers to teach areas that directly violate their First Amendment rights and beliefs. It's going to violate their rights, free speech and everything else. The government cannot compel teachers to speak in a manner that violates their conscience. West Virginia versus Barnett, and we can go on and on. I'm just bringing this to your attention that there are many legal issues and problems with what I read in these standards. I had a teacher talk to me just yesterday at my church, a public school teacher, and he came to me and said, do you know about this? If they tell me I have to teach this stuff, I'm not teaching it, I'm going to get fired. You know? What do you do about those teachers? Secondly, the failure to follow federal law. Again, I won't belabor the point, and federal funding that comes from that. Third, schools failing to notify parents of these gender issues. Look at the Rockford lawsuit that's going on right now. What about opting out provisions? All these things. Parents have the right to notice, to review, and to opt out. It's not just opt out. How are they going to get this notice or review of anything under the health standards? It's not there. Finally, health standards require teaching on topics that can trigger psychological harm, as Senator Tice was talking about. There's no counselor there. There's no psychologist there in the classroom. Look at MCL 380.1506, which includes psychological functions and how that plays into this. Again, parents have to have the right to opt their children out of these types of classes. So the bottom line here from my perspective is this. These health standards undermine the rights of parents, teachers, and students in teaching values in the areas of sex and reproductive health to their kids as permitted under state law. Secondly, I see this as a clear attempt to circumvent and sidestep the notice, review, and opt-out requirements for sex education by throwing it into health education, and then across the board, who knows what other classes they're going to do it. It's a clear attempt to circumvent that law. And finally, it veers away from schools teaching academics and teaching, as opposed to teaching their social justice issues. And I just think this is something that we as a state should not be doing. These health standards should not be adopted as drafted, and I urge you to support H.R. 195. Thank you for the time. I'm happy to answer a question if I've raised anything that anybody has a question on.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Catherine Bessard. It's an honor to speak with you this morning. I do serve as the Executive Director of Salt and Lake Global. I also sit on my local public school board, and I've worked in K-12 education for the vast majority of my career as an instructor and administrator. And I bring that lens of experience today as I speak in my personal testimony. I just want to start talking at the very beginning about the statutes and what they require. You know, as a member of my local school board on the policy committee, we look at the law, we look at the recommendations from the department or the standards, whatever they are, and we try to follow those and adopt our policies and curriculum based on that. And so it's important to understand what the statutes actually say. And I really believe that Dr. Carnell did a disservice to this body when she spoke earlier because she misrepresented the facts. MCL 380-12.78, which she said authorizes the department to create standards for sex ed, does no such thing. The word sex, reproductive health, or HIV, to Rep. Merriman's question when he pressed her on that, none of those words even appear in the statute. How can it authorize them to teach something that isn't even a part of the statute? Quite frankly, that was misinformation. Similarly, with MCL 380.1169, she spoke about how that statute also authorized the department to teach these standards, but it really focuses the department's authority very narrowly to train the trainers of teachers for HIV information, and second, to give medically accurate information to schools so the teachers can use it. But that same law also says that any training on HIV has to follow the process set out in our sex ed law that has the sex ed advisory board working with the local school board to develop the curriculum. It is not a centralized state standard of what is taught on those subjects. That was not accurate information. And finally, with MCL 380.1507, our sex ed law, she's made it very emphatic that nothing is changing here. Well, it's really hard to say that nothing is changing when sex ed and health education are two separate classes, two separate courses, and they may be taught together at the same time, but that's really at the scheduling convenience of the local district as to whether or not they even teach sex ed and where they place it in the school's calendar. To say that nothing changes here is simply not true. What they've done with these health standards is really unprecedented. If you look back at old health standards, there was, teaching about what the law requires, about nutrition and hygiene and first aid and things like that, disease prevention and drugs, don't do drugs. That was health education. Then we had sex education tacked on at the 2007 standards, which, by the way, were a bipartisan effort that was signed under the Granholm administration. This was not some radical polarized issue at all. It was a very bipartisan effort. Those standards set aside sex ed as strand 7. It made it very optional whether or not schools were even required to teach it. It reminded local districts of the law very clearly that if you should teach this, the first thing you have to do is notify parents. You have to allow for curriculum review. You have to allow them the right to opt out without penalizing students or grades or anything like that. And it said these are just truly some suggestions, but the health standards were the health standards. And it's important to understand, that brings me to my second point. Well, I guess I will just say, it brings me to my second point, that there's a big difference between standards and guidelines. And today we were almost, gaslit into this idea that somehow these standards being proposed are really just a suggestion from the State Department of Education on how to teach health education. A local board like mine really doesn't need to take them seriously. We can teach whatever we want. We can pick and choose what's in the standards. That was the suggestion and impression that was very clearly, emphatically, and repeatedly painted by Dr. Carnell. However, that is not consistent with the law. And when I look at the law, again, just a school board member doing my best to follow this would be what I would read in MCL 380.1278. The very first line says, in addition to the requirements for accreditation under Section 1280 specified in this section, if a board of a school district wants all the schools of their district to be accredited under Section 1280, the board shall provide all pupils attending public school in the district a core academic curriculum in compliance with subsection 3 in each of the curricular areas specified in the state board recommended model core academic curriculum standards developed under subsection 2. Health class comes up as you continue reading the statute. By the way, again, sex ed does not. Health class comes up. In other words, if my district wants to be accredited, we must teach at a minimum the standards promulgated by the Michigan Department of Education. If we fail to do so, we can lose our accreditation. So personally, I don't view that as a suggestion. I think that every student in my district is entitled to actually do the work, graduate, and have the state of Michigan recognize their diploma. I don't think we should be cheating children out of that. It is not a mere suggestion. This is not a flexible thing. And that also brings me then to think about the content here. What's embedded in these standards is really unprecedented. We've never seen climate and environmental activism or this emphasis on not trusting parents or this emphasis on sex and social issues put into health curriculum. Health curriculum needs to follow the law. And I also want to mention with parental rights here that the department has suggested that nothing's changing. Again, going back to that 1507 statute. Yes, the law is still in place, But how is a local district like mine supposed to actually enforce that? When sex and gender, just those two words, not to mention reproductive health and other things, when just those two words are listed 111 times in these health standards, if we teach health class in accordance with these standards, with this all mixed in, not just in sex standards, but in decision making and relationships, all these other areas of the standards, if we have to notify parents 111 times, every parent in the district, every time this comes up in a health class, I don't know what your districts look like where you live, but my district is very small. We don't have that big of a staff. I'm really concerned about that notice being effective. And if you notify parents, I've asked the department, what does that look like? If you notify parents just once at the beginning of the year, hey, we're going to teach this, parents don't know when it's appropriate to opt their child out. If you notify parents every single time, those notices start to kind of become something parents are desensitized to, and it's really hard to keep track of. And actually, in the Mahmood case, the Supreme Court actually spoke to that and said that it can be a civil rights violation if we don't make it clear that these are the times when there should be notice and these are the times when it's not really relevant. If we don't clearly notify parents, and if we embed this offensive material throughout the entire curriculum, making it harder for parents to know when to opt out, that in and of itself can actually become a civil rights problem. And then more parents will be visiting Mr. Coleman. And as what Dr. Carnell said, when Representative Green pressed, what are parents to do when these standards are violated? It's a problem right now. There are parents sitting behind me who have been denied the right to review the sex ed curriculum in their district, Grand Ledge Public Schools. There are parents in this room who have had their children taught things that they have expressly opted them out. The damage is done. Their child has been exposed to something against their values. The remedy for a parent becomes an attorney. That's very expensive. And it's not just expensive for the parent, it's expensive for districts like mine that are already cash-strapped, trying to teach kids how to read and write. All of these things that we're talking about today, when the department clearly goes beyond the scope of the law, it takes the focus away from academics. It takes the focus away from children learning to read and write and do math and all the things that we want our children to learn so they can be successful in life. It's important that we follow the laws. It's important that parents have the right to opt out. And as I conclude, I want to share the story of a female student in my district. You may know that the Michigan Dashboard on Adolescent Sexual Health reports that we do have a problem in this state. While our good sex ed laws are doing many wonderful things, one problem that we haven't fixed yet is that 10% of Michigan students report being raped. Among female students, that number is closer to 20%. And I will never forget the day as a school board member when I received a call from a mandatory reporter, and on the line with that mandatory reporter was a mother of a student who, through sobs and tears, told me that her daughter had been raped by a boy at her school. And although the daughter was receiving counseling and all the help that her parents could possibly offer to her until certain legal procedures happened, she still had to attend class every day with that boy, see him every day, in a very small district. Imagine having to sit through a health class under these standards where topics like sex and dating violence and all these other things are embedded, where your parent hasn't necessarily received notice because there is no notice for health class. And all of a sudden you walk in blind to health class, you're hit with this thing that triggers the most traumatic nightmare that you've ever lived through. And you're stuck, numb, remembering that. And then you're supposed to walk out when the bell rings and somehow you're supposed to learn algebra or somehow you're supposed to focus on English lit. That emotional trauma is re-triggered, and as Attorney Coleman said, there's really not psychological help available. And by denying notice, by denying transparency, we're shutting parents out of that critical conversation who would love to be there to help children, who would love to be there to look out for their child's best interest, and we're denying them that opportunity. Sex education and health education are separate in our laws for a reason. Parental involvement exists for a reason. Opt-outs, safeguards, local control, all of these things exist for a reason, and the laws that we have on the books exist for a reason. They deserve to be followed with the utmost care, and that's why I encourage you to support Representative Johnson's resolution, and do everything that you can to encourage the Michigan Department of Education and State Board of Education to reject these standards and to redraft them so that they clearly, carefully follow the laws and respect the rights of Michigan families. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate everyone's testimony. I know Senator Tice does have to get going. Session's beginning. I do have a question for you specifically, and I don't know if any members have a specific question for Senator Tice, but, you know, just talk about, it got touched on briefly by David, but tell us about the impact on teachers that you've recognized or you've understood on how this proposed standards has impacted some teachers.
Thank you for asking that, because it's extremely important. I've got some family members who have recently retired, as soon as they could get there, out of the education system because of the conflict nature that's going on between the parents and the teachers and their administration. And I'll just remind you that in this country, there are 3 major faith traditions that are oppositional to what this teaches. So it goes well beyond my personal faith. It's pretty much around the country. But when you have a teacher who's required to teach the curriculum in front of them, and it's violative of their deeply held religious beliefs, they have a right to sue if they're forced to do that. The parents, understandably, have a right to push back against the curriculum, and it's the teacher that lands on. And so we have a lot of good teachers who are walking away because there are parents who are very angry about what is indoctrinating their children. They're trying to stop it, and they're just aiming at anybody that's imparting this on their kids, understandably. We've got a whole group of people that started out because education was teaching their kids things they shouldn't be teaching them. And I absolutely relate to everything they're doing. And if what we want is to have more teachers in our schools, we need to quit putting them in a position where they're in conflict with the parents. They should be partnered with them. And you can't help them when you create guidelines like this. Help the teachers, help the parents, support this resolution, and MDE reject these guidelines and start again.
If you don't mind, I think we do have one question for you, Senator, additional. Representative Miller?
Yes, thank you, Senator. When this issue was first brought to you, did you make a recommendation that this should be a bill? Since this resolution carries no legal capacity, has no legal force, what was the intended outcome here beyond opinions and statements? And why not introduce a bill that actually addresses the concerns raised here? And if the resolution doesn't change policy, what is the purpose and how, with the purpose, and how does passing a resolution today help improve student health? Education, plain and simple. And to the point that was made on suicides, how often or more likely is an LGBTQ student more likely to attempt suicide than their peers when they feel supported and affirmed at school? Does that risk drop?
Have you completed your questioning? Okay. So first off, we're not asking to create new law. We're asking the Department of Education to actually abide by the law that's in front of them, and they're not. They've gone way out of their lane. So what the resolution does is speak to legislative intent and remind them of what the law already says. They don't have the authority to do this. It's not within the existing law that they do this. Not only is it oppositional to existing law, parents can take them to court because it's violating federally First Amendment rights. It's violating teachers' First Amendment rights. Now, with respect to the suicide, if you look at the actual data, what's happening is kids who have comorbidities, like borderline personality disorder, if you measure all of the comorbidities and you put that up against the general population, they are aligned. Most of the kids they're identifying in the LGBTQ area have comorbidities associated with them, over 30% autistic, actually. So if you align them with the general public, what you find is those comorbidities correlate. And then what happens, and this is my experience with my detransitioning friends, is they end up with all kinds of guilt and discomfort and depression over having permanently changed their bodies in ways that they cannot correct, and they become more, not less suicidal. So I thank you for asking that question.
So to that point, do you have data in any peer-reviewed studies done either with national associations that show those conclusions that you can share with us?
The CAS review.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Senator, for taking the time to be here. I'd like to move quickly as we are coming up against a hard stop here soon. Representative Green. You sure? Okay. Representative Wagala.
Not going to pontificate. I just need to set up the question because it's important. So there's been a lot of conversation about how this can, conversations about gender identity and sexual orientation can make their way into other classrooms. And I was a U.S. history teacher, and I guess what I'm really curious about, are we arguing that the mere acknowledgement of gender identity or sexual orientation and those individuals' contributions to history, such as in World War II, thousands of gay individuals served in the Army, is that, are you saying that that shouldn't happen in those cases? Because I would argue that that is an appropriate part of discussion.
I'm happy to respond to that. Of course not. I mean, we're all Americans. We've all participated. We've all played a part in getting here today. That's not what we're talking about here. And that's part of the problem, is how do you differentiate legitimate historical, social, other things that are totally appropriate to be taught and talked about versus sex education or telling students issues on gender and things like that that the parents in sex ed that should be more for sex education. That's the problem, is how do you split those out? It's a real problem. And these standards muddy it all together. That's the problem.
And these standards even go to the point of teaching attraction and teaching how to engage in various behaviors. That's different than just teaching about Americans living their lives.
Of course. Yeah.
Thank you. Representative Merriman.
Thank you, Chair DeBoer. Catherine, could you, I don't see in the law passed in 2007 sort of the overlap that I'm seeing here being tried, and the doctor, state superintendent, was suggesting that it was taught in the 2007 law signed by Governor Granholm. Is that your understanding? That
That's a great question, and no, this is really totally different. We've never seen this emphasis on sex in health education ever, and we've also never seen it interwoven and intermingled throughout the entire curriculum. In the past, they've always had, age standards and that for health education, and if anything, that most recent 2007 standard, it kind of had an appendix called Strand 7, where sex ed, it was very clear this is totally a local control issue. If you teach it, here's the law, here's the parental protection, student protections, and it was set aside kind of as a bonus section, an appendix. It was not interwoven into the core health standards so that it was very clear to districts, this is what you need to teach, totally optional. And these standards completely lack that clarity.
We do have time for one more question. Representative Pohutsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back a little bit to the point about not hearing from the families of queer or trans kids about possible bullying, why would you expect a parent of a queer or trans kid to reach out to someone who is actively scapegoating them to distract from the fact that 1.4 million Michiganders are about to lose their food assistance?
It would be you that would ask such a stupid question at this hearing.
Do you have an intelligent answer?
Hey, we're gonna stay on topic here, please, both. Thank you.
I'd be happy to respond to that just briefly.
In the interest of
It
time,
wasn't for you.
Please,
Well, all right.
please. As we are well past our time here, first I'm going to apologize. There's a number of individuals that put in cards to speak. Sheila Kuhn supports the bill, put in a card wishing to speak. I apologize to you that we will not be able to get you up. David, obviously you're here. Eileen McNeil supports the bill, wish to speak. I apologize to you. Catherine Bouchard supports the bill. Apologize to you. Kristen Lee supports the bill. I apologize to you. Lisa West supports the bill. I apologize to you. Sandra Tannehill opposes the standards. I apologize to you. Brittany Hausman opposes the bill. Wish to speak. I apologize to you. Additionally, we had 170 either electronically or personally submitted. Excuse me? The resolution. Standards, I guess you could imply, but the resolution, they support the resolution or oppose the resolution. 170 turned in that support the resolution that did not wish to speak. We're going to notice them for the record. Is that the end of it, clerk? That is the end of the wishing to speak. I'm sorry, and also wishing to just make their position known. Representative Green moves to report House Resolution 195 with recommendation. Will the clerk call the roll?
On the motion to report, Chair DeBoyer?
Yes.
Representatives Bierlein?
Yes.
Mearman?
Yes.
Paquette?
Yes.
Cara?
Yes.
Bruck?
Yay.
Green?
Yes.
Regas?
Yes.
Shriver?
Yay.
Wolford? Miller?
No.
Pahutsky?
No.
Conlon?
No.
McDonald? Menser?
No.
Cerniglu? Wagella? Mr. Chair, you have 10 yeas, 7 nays, 0 pass. H.R. 195 is reported with recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Seeing no absent, there being no further business before the committee, the Oversight Committee will stand adjourned.
It's not for you. That's right. That wasn't a question.